the three of us, Orly and Lisa and I, my name is Cathy Berry, and Orly kind of mentioned me earlier, are here to talk about investing in community. And it's not, and when we think about investing in community, it's like, well, we're going to put money out there. But investing in community is way more than just writing checks. Investing in community is putting heart and soul into literally also creating community. And all three of us, in our own way, have put a lot of time and energy into investing in community and creating companies that are literally microcosms of community. And we've also interacted, and we will all talk about how the interaction, how we've actually worked together. And because this is a Strolling of the Heifers, and Orly is the brainchild and workhorse behind Strolling of the Heifers, we're going to start with Orly. Work heifer. It can't be a workhorse, it's got to be a work heifer. Sorry, I should have known. So Orly's going to start and talk about how she started it. And one thing that I think I can say we all have in common is we all started organizations that nobody thought were needed. And they all have been quite needed. And the work that we're doing has been quite needed. And I think that women do this way more than men. We sort of decide there's a need, and we see a need, and we step in, and we just do it and see what happens. And we're here to tell you what happened when we stepped in. So, Orly, how are you going to start with a video, Orly?
Well, let me have. Hi, everyone. So, Strolling of the Heifers is, this is our 18th year, and really I've worked on it 19 years. So I feel like it's now an adult, ready to be launched, and I'm really, really excited about that. Who'd ever thought, looking around people who've been with the Stroll since day one, that we would be here in this building. I still remember sitting back there 19 years ago telling my friend Fern Tavlin about this crazy idea I had, and down walks, this building was just built, and so Bernie Sanders and his entourage walked and were looking at the river, and I said, who is this? Look at all these people, and they're huddling there, and she says, oh, that's Bernie Sanders. He was a congressman at that time. I said, oh, well, what do you think? I should go and tell him my idea. And I did. And he said, oh my God, this is the jewel of my crown. This is what I believe in. And he made them all give me his business cards. And my friend Fern is sitting next door at the table, one of these tables. And she said, boy, you have real chutzpah. And he really encouraged me. I mean, I didn't get any financing for him at that time, but it just felt good to be recognized. And he would come to all our parades, and it helped just for notoriety. He did help one time when I started a, what did I call it? Farm apprentice program. And now the Career Center has taken over, and it's sustainable, which is wonderful. He did help with that, and just been very encouraging. So, you know, it's taken many transformation, and even today, what's the most exciting is that Heifer International is here working with us, and I can't, you know, it's beyond me how wonderful all these organizations have come together. And I think the success of Strolling of the Heifers is that we're open to everyone. We welcome everyone. We want to work with everyone. This is a nonprofit. No one is getting wealthy from it. And we all work very hard. And, you know, our barn is always open. And I think that is the success. We listen to people. We welcome people from all backgrounds. And it's really a fun group. It's very exciting. And various programs have built from the ideas of many people put together. As soon as somebody has an idea, we all get excited and we say, how can we make this work? And I think what Cathy said is correct. It's usually the women. You know, men are more systematic and they think about it, and women just a real risk takers and entrepreneur, but they're more frugal, much more frugal. For myself, people who I work with, they think I'm crazy, to spend all this time to get all this in-kind support and all this kind of thing. But that's how women are. And they're cautious in that way, but I think they're bigger risk takers. So I'd like to show you a little 2-minute video of what Strolling of the Heifers is. And I just love this. And again, even this video was all in kind.
At the Strolling of the Heifers, we believe the best way to directly impact the growth of the food and agriculture economy is to invest in the local communities, businesses, and farms that support it. Downtown Brattleboro, our 9,000 square foot innovation center hosts community gatherings, meetings, lectures, concerts, and programs year-round, including our world-famous Strolling of the Heifers weekend, including a block party, whimsical parade of lovable heifer calves, an 11-acre slow living expo, farmer's breakfast, local farm tour, and the Tour de Heifer bicycle tour, one of Vermont's most challenging dirt road rides. How committed is your state to healthy local food? Our annual Locavore Index rates all 50 states and stimulates discussion across the country on increasing local food consumption. The Slow Living Summit, a 2-day annual summit that provides entrepreneurs the tools, resources, and mentorship to start and grow their conscious food and agriculture business. The Farm to Table Apprenticeship. Our ongoing training program teaches culinary skills to veterans and underemployed community members, placing them in full-time, permanent positions at local restaurants and institutional kitchens. Windham Grows. Our 6-month farm and food business hatchery provides the mentorship, resources, and support entrepreneurs need to take their business to the next level. Whether we're celebrating farmers and food producers, placing underemployed community members in meaningful jobs, or investing in emerging entrepreneurs, the Strolling of the Heifers is committed to strengthening the farm and food economy and the local communities, businesses, and farms that support it. Help us carry out our mission by making a tax-deductible donation at strollingoftheheifers.com/donate.
So we're always looking for volunteers. And so I think I've told enough about it, and it's become a really important organization for our community in Brattleboro and other areas, and we've have friends all over the country, in fact, various parts of the world as well. And I would like to give it back to Cathy.
Orly, I just have one question for you. How many volunteers are you currently managing at Strolling of the Heifers?
Well, for the event itself, which is our fundraiser for all this work we do, about 320, something like that. And the woman who helps with a lot of the volunteers, Vicki Friedman, and she's right in the back there.
Thanks, Orly. I mean, can you imagine having an organization that is literally has on tap 320 volunteers and actually organizing them? I think that's pretty astounding. So the other thing, let me just see if we can, I'll slide down a little bit. Yeah, we all have to move down a little bit. Now are we ready? Okay. My name is Cathy Berry, and I decided that I should really learn about money because I grew up on a farm, and I thought I ought to know about cities, and I became a stockbroker and then a money manager. And in this process, I realized that the Wall Street The Wall Street, whoa. The Wall Street investors, Wall Street investing was really about just playing games. You know, we're talking derivatives and options, and you're charting, and it's kind of a numbers game. It wasn't actually, as a broker or money manager, you weren't really doing anything but, you know, moving paper. There wasn't anything behind it, and if you grew up as a farmer, it's kind of a weird feeling. So I said, well, why can't we put money into, you know, local, you know, into the local economy? And I went to SVN with Judy Wicks and met Woody Tash and ended up on the board of Investor Circle. And I said, well, all we got to do is tell people, let's look at the total cost and let's invest locally. And this is in 2001, and people looked at me like I was a little bit crazy. And it's a good idea, but it's way too risky. So we've all heard this before. Whatever you want to do, it's a good idea, but it's way too risky. And, you know, now, 19 years later, 18 years later, people are still saying, well, that's a really great idea. It's too risky. And when you look at standard impact investing, which is now infiltrated Wall Street, it's still about extraction. How much are investors going to make? Not how much is the community going to benefit? What are the wages going to be for the workers? What are the rewards to the entrepreneur? Like guys, communities are the bedrock of our economy. The middle class is the bedrock of our economy. Most jobs are in small companies. Don't you think if we want to survive, we would invest locally and in small companies? And one of the key things, there are a couple of key things that we need to survive. Clean air, and food, and shelter, and water. And somehow we seem to have left all of those pretty much out of the investment equation. We do have some home building stocks out there, but there's nothing about keeping water clean, nothing about investing in the local economy, and we've kind of eliminated the idea that food is real food. Because if you look at the companies on Wall Street, they are producing chemicals that masquerade as food. I mean, I may be exaggerating because there are some organic companies floating around, but they are like infinitesimal, so I'm generalizing here. So I thought that I would try investing locally, and it's extraordinarily difficult because it takes way more money than you would think. So my success in Vermont was Vermont Smoke and Cure. And that was a company that literally, without the amazing CEO that I had, Chris Bailey, and my insane desire to build the food processing system and keep that company alive so we could process for companies, it wouldn't have succeeded. Meaning I emptied retirement accounts, Chris worked for peanuts, and the company is now national. And we eventually we had some very large investors come in, and I still own a stake. And eventually Chris got moved out because that's what happens when big guys come in. They want someone just a little bit more efficient. But he has happily moved on to Victory Hemp Foods, and that's a whole nother story, and it can change the world. And I changed the world in terms of hemp because they're doing hemp protein powder, and I'm also involved in investments with Victory Hemp Foods. So we're sort of still tracking. So one of the things that's really critical, whether you as an investor are donating your time or money to the stroll, and whether you're looking into investing in these local companies like a Vermont Smoke and Cure or a Victory Hemp Foods or a MamaSezz, because we're going to hear from MamaSezz, is who is there to write checks other than you? What is the team behind these companies? One of the key successes to Vermont Smoke and Cure was that virtually everyone in the state, we had money from state agencies, and we had all of the investors until the big guys came in the last round that we did in 2015, were mission related. They just wanted this company to succeed. They wanted Chris to succeed, and their hope was down the road they'd get their money back. They were not expecting a big win because they already saw there was a huge win in the fact that farmers got to process their meat at a USDA processing plant and could now sell it at farmers markets and at stores in the local area. I mean, economically, that made a huge difference. We processed ham, we processed bacon, we processed snack sticks. Basically, we processed the competition. And what that did is it created more processing plants in Vermont. At one time, we processed for over 600 farmers. We were like the only game in town. You know, now Black River processes, and there are multiple ones. I couldn't even list them all right now. We're no longer so critical, and you know what? That's fine. That's great. And the same thing happened when the larger investor came in. They approached us. We did not approach them, and we chose to do this investment knowing that Chris could be moved out, and that I had to sell roughly half my shares for them to come in. We knew that it wasn't going to be the same Vermont Smoke and Cure, but we felt it was important to demonstrate that there could be a snack stick out there that was just meat and no junk. And the other key thing is to know when to step aside. At that point, we now got the corporate big guys coming in. And I said, you know what? I don't know enough about this, and I'm resigning from the board. And we had another Vermont company CEO, ex-CEO at that time, Lisa Lorimer, who had started Vermont Bread Company, and she took my place on the Vermont Smoke and Cure board. Because now, Lisa had the experience of growing a company, Vermont Bread Company, and selling it. So that her knowledge, like bringing that knowledge onto the board, was critical. So when you're looking at investing, whether it's investing in a for-profit or donating to a nonprofit, what's the expertise? What are they able to do? Who are their advisors? Should you be an advisor? I mean, I donate time, energy, and my family foundation has donated to Strolling of the Heifers. And we're currently an investor in MamaSezz. It gets, this world is very small. And I am personally on the board and an investor in Vermont Food Crafters, which used to be called Bristol Works in Bristol. And Lisa is in talks with Kevin Harper, the CEO, to manufacture a product for MamaSezz. And Kevin is on the board of Vermont Smoke and Cure.
Welcome to Vermont.
Literally. So here in Vermont, as an investor, when you invest in these small companies, you're literally investing in Vermont. You're investing in a network. And a shout out to some of the other organizations are here. The Vermont Community Loan Fund has certainly played a big role in a lot of small companies and given them some loans, and they are here. Eli Moulton has been a lawyer for the companies I've been involved in since 2001 and have provided expert legal advice. So we're not doing this on our own. We're doing this literally as a state. VD, Vermont Economic Development Fund has come in, and it has definitely helped all these companies, has given these companies a boost here and there in various places. And the same thing with the Strolling of the Heifers. Because Vermont, because it's such a small microcosm, can actually look at what these organizations are doing and say, well, yeah, you know what? This is really creating economic development. And we need to support you. When Vermont Smoke and Cure got stiffed by a bank, we will not name names, We thought we had a deal and we didn't. The Vermont Economic Development Fund said, listen, bring in some equity and we'll match that, with a loan. And I had a private investor loan, just did a short-term loan. We brought in equity. Vermont Economic Development came in. So there's a safety net. And so as you're looking at, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, how are you building your team? And if you're a nonprofit, who are your players? And some of the nonprofits, we have Salvation Farms here. You can say hi. Now we're talking gleaning. Is there excess food that Salvation Farms has that can go into Orly's program or MamaSezz could use, et cetera, et cetera? How can all of these various organizations work together? And how can the nonprofits support the for-profits and vice versa? Like, how do we work together? So how many people here are entrepreneurs, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit? How many people are investors? We've got some investors here. How many are just curious and want change? Everybody. So I want to leave lots of room for questions. I'm going to turn this over to Lisa, who is obviously a serial entrepreneur, because not only did she get on the board of Vermont Smoke and Cure and went through all sorts of creative things with our larger investment team, but she has now started a vegan food company, MamaSezz, which is actually located in Keene and has a storefront here in Brattleboro. And the food is gorgeous to look at and yummy to eat and extraordinarily healthy. And I'll let her tell you how she started it, because it's a typical nurturing story that one would expect.
Oh, thanks. I was really interested to listen to you say that everyone tells you it's a good idea, it's just too much risk. Everybody tells me it's a really bad idea. That's pretty much my life. So what I did is I have a couple of slides just to talk about Vermont bread and to talk about MamaSezz. So if you don't mind, this helps me remember what I want to say. This whole idea of things being a bad idea, one of the first questions was, how do we invest in what is truly needed and not add to the waste? This is the starting story of Airbnb. If you are familiar, it was basically two guys that couldn't pay their rent. And they did some air mattresses to have people come in, and they had a couple of people come, and two men and one woman showed up. They paid $80 each, and so they just keep going around, and eventually they're making $200 a week, but they're not growing. And they realized that they needed to go take pictures, and they take pictures, and then now they're making $400 a week. Eventually, as you know, this becomes a $10 billion company. And same thing with the startup of Amazon, right? So it's a really bad idea. He makes a list of 20 things. He decides he's going to quit his good job and sell books. And they tell the story, and we kind of laugh about this at MamaSezz too, like they ring a bell every time there's an order. And the bell didn't ring very often in the early days. And so that brings me to the starting story of Vermont Bread Company, which is we were in a world of squishy white bread. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember back to the early 80s, but when you were growing up, Wonder Bread, right? Just like make strong kids, you jump over, buildings and stuff. And so that's what we came into, and we started making this whole grain and organic breads in a little barn on the Bonnevale Road up in Guilford. And everybody told us it was a bad idea, right? It's such a bad idea. I mean, you can't mix it. It's too dense. You can't slice it. I mean, if you can mix it, you can't slice it. And then it's going to go moldy in a couple of days. You can't sell it on the supermarket shelf, right? So that's what everybody just kept saying that. So we found a library in Kansas. And we asked them to go back to the 1920s and tell us what the answer was back then. And so that's what we used. So it was a bad idea. Everyone said it's a really bad idea. And so, as we think about what we need, I know we talked at lunch, we had a great lunch over at the co-op, about the kind of things that really help entrepreneurs make something happen. And we need this level of infrastructure. We need advisory boards. If anybody wants to talk about that, any entrepreneurs, we're having a breakout session later. Networking opportunities, access to capital, which is what Cathy's been talking about, and then a resource central. So, some of you were talking at lunch about distributors, and so like, who do you talk to about, how do you get distribution for your products? And so one of the big things that I always think of, if you want to start a business, solve your own problem, right? So Vermont Bread Company was, who wants to eat that really metallic tasting bread? And so we started making natural breads. And the story of I did end up exiting Vermont Bread Company because our customers got so big and our suppliers got so big that we needed to be one big national company. And so back when I was 40 years old, I realized what needed to happen, and I went and found a private equity firm to help me go and buy my friends. And so that's what we did. And so I exited that at the same time that I lived my life backwards and went and got an MBA after I'd been a CEO for 25 years. And so I had my final paper for my MBA was due in April of 2014 at 9 o'clock in the morning, so I submitted, of course, at 8:59. And then at 9:01, we hit the Wall Street Journal because we had sold Vermont Bread Company, the half of it, to a public company. And so then I retired, right? So I was retired. Yeah. I mean, who would go back in the food business? It's such a dumb thing. So anyway, this is the story. And there's actually a film crew here from Netflix and HGTV filming the story today. So if you'll see their buses running around town. But this is the story of my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law was 80 years old, and this is my daughter. And this was on a good day. She let us take a picture of her. And she was dying. She had congestive heart failure. She was going into hospice care. And we brought her home to live with us for her last days. And believe it or not, that's the after picture. That's not the before picture. So that's the before, that's the after. Because we found a doctor in Cleveland that just told us to feed her a whole food plant-based diet. And with no oil. And so we just started to do that, and she's about to turn 89. So the problem with eating this way, if you've ever tried to eat this way, it's insane. You spend half your life chopping and half your paycheck at the produce section. And so we said, okay, we need someone to do this for us, because we started making this food for a friend that had a stroke, and another friend had a heart attack, and so we were making all this food at our house. And then I realized there was nobody doing this, so I had to go back into the food business, and so a business was born. And so that's kind of the story of like how do you actually get into a business, especially when people keep telling you that it's a bad idea. Everyone says this is a bad idea too, by the way, because it's impossible to sell fresh homemade meals, in a container direct to customer. So everyone thinks this is a bad idea too. But I'm having fun. And so there's the piece in here that actually, if you are an entrepreneur and you come to this session afterwards, I'll talk about this, about how do you find your blue ocean. So that was my answer to that question, and this is who I am. So, thanks.
Do some more slides. So anyway, because we're such a range, we have such a range of people out there, and we covered a lot of topics. This is going to be your only shot at asking Orly questions, because she said she's actually busy doing something and doesn't have time for a breakout session. I don't know what she's doing, but So we are happy to expound some more, but we wanted to also leave it open for questions, because we sort of raised a lot of issues that keep coming up over and over again. So, questions? Or do you want us to keep talking? Lisa's got some more slides.
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk about this, like, how do you think about stock investing? I know there's some investors in the room. I'd like to talk about how it is you invest in companies, and I know we talk a lot about the triple bottom line, and I know people in this room are really familiar with this, the people, the planet, the profit. You know, we always talk a lot about this at Social Venture Network. We're paying livable wages, and we're really focused on having employee ownership. Now, one of the things that happened, and Cathy mentioned this, I worked with a private equity firm to sell my company, and I'm working with this same VNG private equity firm here. Is that I noticed that as I start to talk to my friends who have sold to investors, at the end of the day, the new investors walk away with most of the money. And I'm like, wait a minute, what is going on here? How is it possible that like all these people take risks, like Cathy Berry? I mean, so many businesses in Vermont would not exist without Cathy Berry. She and her colleagues really take a risk with Vermont entrepreneurs. And at the end of the day, the new investor that comes in takes all the pie. It's like their whole goal is to take all the pie. And so I tried to figure out what that was, and I realized that the difference is between common shares and preferred shares. Now, this is a bit of a math lesson, so I know it's painful, but this is how the 1% is the 1%, or a part of the problem. So common shares are our employees and our early investors and the co-founders, right? So we all come, we start a company, we all have common shares. And then the new investors come in and they ask for preferred shares. And what that means is exactly what it sounds like. They get a preference, right? And so preferred stock pays a dividend regardless of how the company's doing. So they take a percentage, usually 6 to 8% per year. And they pay out, in this example that I'm using, this is called a 2x preferred, participating preferred. And so they even make the language hard to understand. Like, what does that mean, right? 2x participating preferred? How can that be? What does that actually mean? And so here's an example, all right? So we start with a company whose valuation is about $500,000. You're raising some money. Each of the co-founders has 20%. Their friends and family have 20%. Their employees have 20%. And the new investor comes in at 20%. Looks good, right? Everybody's equal. Everybody's got a 20% share. Everybody's happy, right? So that's how everybody's got 20%. Life is good. Then in 3 years, the company sold for $1 million, right? So, hey, cool. The employees made a lot of money. The founders did. The friends and family. Everybody doubled their money, right? No. No, because what happens is that how they split the money is they get their dividends. Remember I told you about that? Stay with me on the math. I know it's really boring, but it's important. So they get $24,000 for that. The 2x means they get 2 times their money back before the pie gets split up. Ooh, wow. So they get $224,000 off the top. The 2x, here's the 200 is their $100,000 times 2. Everybody has $100,000 in the beginning. So everybody's share's worth $100,000, and then they get 2 times their money back, and then we split what's left, right? So that leaves $776,000 left. So each of the equity partners, including them, gets their 20% of that, which is $155. But remember, they got their $224 on top of that. So this is what happens when the company gets sold. There's only one person making a huge amount of money over there. So what that means is that if we insist only on common stock ownership, then at the starting and the ending looks exactly like that. So I did this really big, scary thing at MamaSezz. And I went out when I was raising money, and I was trying to raise $1.5 million to invest in the company so we could be national. And I went out to the investment crowd, and I said, nobody's coming in ahead of my employees. And that meant that I had to say no to an awful lot of money, because a lot of the investors that came said, oh no, we have to be preferred. I'm like, if you think you're socially responsible and you're coming in ahead of our employees, you're not socially responsible. That's not fair. That's not right. You can't come in ahead of the friends and family like Cathy Berry. That's not right. So we have taken a huge stand, and I don't know of anybody else that's done this, but we took a really big stand, and we were running out of cash to keep going, and I know I had to raise the money, and I said no to money. And I'm going to go out and start talking about this, because this is not talked about at all. So Cathy gave me the the ability to just start to have this conversation here. And actually, if you could give me feedback if this made sense to you, because this is my first time trying to talk about it in public. But we are not going to let anybody come in ahead of our employees. And Cathy Berry said yes.
So is it a bad idea?
No. Yeah, everyone's, well, all VCs say it's a bad idea. Now, what I do and what our foundation does is when we see this preferred stuff and investors coming in, we say, well, we don't want to invest. And so we have some really interesting discussions because people say, oh, but this is a mission-based company. Now, this is where you investors have a lot of power, because people want your money. You can literally change the landscape. Because as an investor, you can say, well, I'm not going to invest in a company unless everybody's equal, unless everybody's going to get the same payout. Because why should the investors get more than the employees if this thing sells or if it pays a dividend? Like, the employees are the guys, and the entrepreneurs are the ones who are in there every single day making it work. For Vermont Smoke and Cure, I made sure that Chris Bailey had 20% of that stock. He'd worked his butt off. He hadn't made a whole lot, and 20% was what we decided made sense, you know, for him to have. And people say, well, wasn't it hard to give it away? Are you kidding? That company would have succeeded without him. Because in the end, what you have to realize is that by sharing, you're actually gaining a whole lot. How much do you really need? I mean, are you really keeping score by the money in your bank or by how many lives you've changed? I mean, think about what Lisa is doing by standing firm. And she has tracked down investors who are willing to say, you're absolutely right. And we don't need to get preferred. You know, in fact, that was the key thing for us investing. Not that yes, we think the company's going to be successful. But, you know, as a foundation, when we looked at it and we said, well, this is really cool because this is what we're trying to beat into everybody's heads. You know, we get the VC firms calling us up, oh, we're doing impact investing. And we go, well, and, you know, and then there's the 20% off the top and the this and that. And we're like, that's not mission. That's impactful. Yeah, it's dollars in the investors in your pockets. You know, so forget it. We're not interested. So this is Lisa's inaugural.
Yes. And I will say that our lead investor is actually a Silicon Valley billionaire. And so he got it. He understood what we were doing.
So what about questions, anyone? Jim, are you know? Jim.
So I find this fascinating. Didn't know anything about this. Just wondering what it would have been like if before you made all your money, this is how it was.
I think it would be scarier, for sure. I mean, the truth is that I sold Vermont Bread Company, and I can pay my mortgage easily. Yeah, it's different. I think that once we get this out there and it just becomes the norm, that's what I hope, is that it just becomes what we do as we talk about socially responsible investing. You know, at Vermont Bread Company, we didn't have any outside investors, so this wasn't even on my radar. We were all bank debt and my credit card debt. And so this is a new thing for me. I get to think about it differently because I have the experience of Vermont Bread Company, and now I've been working with private equity firms, and now I understand it because it's kind of like a different language. But I think it's really hard to say no to any kind of cash coming in the door when you need to grow your company and you got to meet payroll, right? So it's a really hard thing. And it's easier for me because my bills are paid.
So I think that you're going to be very threatening to the financial world. I'm wondering if you've gotten any feedback from them at this point, outside of, obviously, they're not going to contact you unless they've approached you to fund something or something. Are you getting any feedback from them?
Actually, to tell you the truth, this is the first time I've actually talked about it publicly. I mean, Cathy asked me to come and talk about this. I've been talking about it in our presentations to investors, but this is the first time I've ever made a public stand here. I've made a very, very strong stand within the company and within the investors that I talk to. You know, people just say, oh, well, you're not going to get any money. And maybe that's true. But I think it's worth having this conversation. And it's worth having everybody understand, like, this is one of the building blocks of the 1%, right? So it's like, let's put, you know, the emperor has no clothes. Let's talk about this.
So one of the things that happens is when you sort of make a stand like this is the VCs, if there are VCs involved, they get kind of pissed off and they tend to go away. The other interesting thing that happens is that typically the other investors, even though it's to their advantage, tend to defend the VC status quo. I mean, I've been involved in a couple situations where people said, yeah, but shouldn't it be? And I'm like, why? The other thing that we've also heard in Vermont, we meaning alternative investors, is that we're taking money away from the banks. So now, typically people attempt to go to the bank first. So it's ironic that the banks are saying, well, you're taking money away from us. Because as a private investor, you can choose to do bridge loans. Like, say a company's raising capital. Well, you can do a bridge loan so that the company has cash in the bank and get paid back when they raise the money, knowing that there could be problems or delays in them raising the money, but you know, there can be an intent. And you can also do letter of credits. And letter of credits are reasonably safe because they can be backed by inventory or the building or receivables or something like that. So that you're essentially doing a secured loan. The loan that Vermont Smoke and Cure was denied at a critical point was actually a letter of credit. And we just hadn't signed the papers and the bank decided we needed too much. So meanwhile, a private investor then took that over. So it was literally a secured loan. I mean, the private investor, we would have had to not sell anything for them to lose their money. So as a private investor, you have that ability to step in and essentially be a bank. And now there are a lot of forms online. I mean, it's handy to go to a lawyer. But what you want to make sure when you go to a lawyer is that the lawyer is willing to draft a document that's beneficial to everyone. And this is a really, really tricky point. The concept of business being beneficial to all parties involved, much the way Lisa has structured this, is really not in our legal system's mindset. Because what they want to do is tilt it in one form or another. Because they're representing the client, and so they don't want to do it, you know, as a benefit to the whole group, which is essentially what Lisa's talking about. And what Lisa hasn't included in this equation, and I'm not quite sure how she would add it, is that she is really attempting to bring product in, and I'll turn it over to her, from the local farms. So not only is she benefiting, and Vermont Smoke and Cure did the same thing, not only is she benefiting the investor, the employees, and the community and health, you know, because she's taking a stand on health, and Vermont Smoke and Cure was saying, okay, we need a meat stick that doesn't have all this crap and it's not a granola bar. So these companies are all taking stands on a health basis, but it's also how do we benefit the food system? That's why we processed for, Vermont Smoke and Cure processed for other farmers. And we processed our competition. So I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa because now we can get the farmers involved.
Yeah, I think Rich is here from Food Connects, and there's someone else here from McKenna's here too. Yeah, so we try to think about this whole I had a kind of a do-over, right? So I sold my company, and now with everything I know, I get to do a do-over, which is kind of fun. And so I wanted to have something that I could make sure that I had supply year-round. So I do work with a produce distributor, but when it's available from local farms, I bring it in from local farms. And I also bring in uglies. So I'm trying to bring, use everything that the farmer has, so that that's not having to go to waste in any way. And so what I do is I have basically a published list with my local farmers, and I say, here's what I can get it from Back River, and that's what I'll pay. So they don't have to pay for distribution. So, and what that means is that in your company model, when you're developing it, you have a slightly larger percentage set aside for ingredients, right? Because you're trying to do something else at the same time to make sure you still have your margins, because it is a triple bottom line. You have to be profitable, but just trying to think through, like, what are the ways that I can have an impact, that I can build it into my business model so that everybody does well.
So I'm Kate Dodge. My husband and I own Putney Mountain Winery. Thanks, Jim. Putney Mountain Winery, and we opened in 1998. And our goal at that time, and still is to use local produce. And we use a great deal of local produce. And it's wonderful, but at a certain point, for some things, we can't get enough. And so and we've done, one answer to that is we've bought plants for farmers, so we can get more of what we need. That's kind of a long-term investment, because apple trees don't produce apples right away. But when if you're going to a bigger level, at one point, does that become impossible? And where do you go with that?
Yeah, I don't think of it as my total solution. I think what's cool, and I think having Food Connects in the middle of all this now is really exciting, because they can see like what the capacity is and help to build the capacity within our farm industry to be able to supply you and me. So that's fun. But I always have a backup plan, belts and suspenders. I'll buy local. Like last year I was buying local spinach from Stonewall Farm, and the power went out and she lost her whole crop. So you can never have a single source, of course. So I always have a backup. And, we're still burning diesel going to California in the middle of winter to bring back stuff for us. And so, these are the kind of things that if we can build up the capacity locally, we don't need to burn all that to, Black River sending trucks out to California. They'd love to not do that. It'd be great to have the capacity more locally.
Rather than,
We can talk about it afterwards. Yeah, no, these are really important conversations, and I think the Food Connects folks in the room that's what they're working on. So I definitely recommend talking to them.
So I think one of the key things is that we can't transition to Vermont's a really small state, and I think as these companies grow, like a Vermont Smoke Cure, then we started saying, well, how close can we get? What we could buy from Canada. Because, the plant's up in Heinsberg. So how do we reduce our footprint? And this also takes us to, a real crux of the matter. Well, how big is too big? And ultimately, that's a decision not only for nonprofits. Every time Orly adds another layer, I go, Orly, what about the infrastructure? What about the management? And because yes, this stuff is needed, but how much are we, the entrepreneur, the investor, how much can we actually handle, and how big do we want to get? And if you are expanding and you have to ship to California, and I'm going to turn this back over to Lisa, do you just create another processing plant somewhere else to limit your carbon footprint? And that's actually happening.
Yeah, it's happening right now. We're working on opening a plant in Reno, Nevada. But it's all a process, right? It's all process, not perfection. You can't. So we have to build the capacity so that the farmers can plant and then give us what we need to get us through the winter.
So someone's going to ask a wonderful question. I know this guy.
I've just heard 2 or 3 people ask about sort of scaling. And one of the reasons you go to investors is money to build stuff. Could you talk to the audience about scaling and scaling right? Because I see a lot of companies who are successful scale incorrectly, and that puts them out of business. Getting too big too quickly, over-investing.
Yeah.
What are the risks in scaling and thinking about scale with your business?
Yeah, we were talking about this at lunch too, because Vermont Bread Company is the private label producer for Trader Joe's. And so when Trader Joe's opened on the East Coast, we said yes when they had 3 stores, and then they grew like a bat out of hell. I mean, they just went crazy. And so we were trying to talk about like how big is big enough, right? So big enough, if you're going to work with Trader Joe's, means you have to keep them at less than 20% of your business. So you have to go the rest of your business to keep up with that. And then you also, it's a constant iteration, right? So one of the issues back when I was running Vermont Bread is that our health insurance costs were just going like this, right? And so was our workers' comp. And so in order to be a responsible employer and to pay a livable wage with benefits, with those health care costs rising like that, we had to grow fast enough so that we could afford that, because we couldn't put that onto our employees. And so there's a lot of different things as you think about it. I mean, one of the things that I always encourage entrepreneurs to do is to bust at the seams. Like before you go making some big move to buying don't buy real estate. There's my walk out of here if you don't learn anything at all, entrepreneur, don't buy real estate, because it's crazy. Because you're locked in. It's one of the fastest ways to get killed. You want to lease until you're busting out of the seams and you can really afford to scale. And so you want the flexibility. And so, at Vermont Bread, we just made it so that you couldn't go like this and not touch a conveyor. So you want to kind of bust out of the seams before you make a big move. That's me. I tend to be conservative about that kind of stuff. I see people making big moves, and if you're not able to fill the capacity, or if you're chasing a big customer, and you go and build all the infrastructure for that, and that customer goes away, you're really in trouble. And so in that way, it was kind of good that I financed Vermont Bread on credit cards, because I couldn't go build that big fancy thing. But I really recommend, and one of the key pieces of advice, I wrote a book with Margot Fraser, the founder of Birkenstock USA, and one of our key pieces of advice for entrepreneurs is get an advisory board. Like, get other entrepreneurs to come and sit around a table with you and talk, because we can give you all of our experience and our network to help you make these kind of big decisions.
So with Vermont Smoke and Cure, we were in a little tiny smokehouse behind a garage, and it was 3,000 square feet. So, and we had refrigerator trucks. I mean, it was a nightmare. Our production costs were off the charts. And so Chris decided that what we needed to do was move into an 18,000 square foot facility from our 3,000 square foot facility. Now, and that made rational sense before you're going back of the envelope, because we felt that we were now poised with the paleo diet and whatnot to move. And when you're doing processing plants, particularly meat processing plants, they have absolutely no value once you move, and they cost a fortune to fit up. So part of what you're looking at as a food entrepreneur is, where do you think you can actually cover the costs and raise the money to move from the 3,000 to the 18,000 square foot facility, so that you don't have to build another facility? Because your other option to growing is, can you find a co-packer that you trust? And so you really, this is where the advisors come in, and this is where talking to other entrepreneurs come in, because you need to decide where your time and energy are going. So with Vermont Food Crafters in Bristol, we are actually a processing plant for baked goods, cookies, crackers, and things like that. So the entrepreneur, when they're out of the kitchen, they can come to us and we will help with the packaging, and we will produce the food so that you, the entrepreneur, do not have to raise money. And it still gets labeled made in Vermont. So now you can be a Vermont company and you don't have to build a processing plant. So this is a really, really tricky place on how to grow, where to grow, and who can you trust. And going with co-packers isn't always safe because they could go out of business. Meaning, where are you on their scale? Or they could get a big order and your order gets dumped to the bottom. So it's very, very tricky.
Chip's got the mic.
Thanks. I'm going back to the money stuff. In your model, you had the $500,000 and the $100,000 came from the workers. And I'm wondering if that represents actually money coming in from the workers, or if those are shares given to workers, and how investors feel about that, and how you justify that, like, because they're the workers that make it happen, or is that take justifying, or how does that work? How does that go?
That's actually something that investors are really used to, and they really like it. And so basically, if you're valuing your company at $500,000 and 20% of your shares is going to be for your employees, it's just given a value of $100,000. You get legal advice about whether it's restricted stock units and how it all gets set up. But it's just how it breaks out on what they call the cap table, and so the employees haven't put that money in, but it's set aside for employees.
Is that the same with the entrepreneurs? Or can you go back to it?
Sure.
Just tell us a little bit more about the actual money that's involved in a model like that.
Typically, the co-founders and the family and friends have put some money in to get the thing started. And then the employees, it's usually just a set aside for 10% or 20%, depending on your structure. And then we are raising money, so you put 20% to the new investor. So that's $100,000 worth of new money that's coming in. You've already spent the rest of the money.
So it's mostly the $100,000 that you're going for, and that's why they want the preferred share, because we're the actual money. And then
That's exactly what they say.
Do any of you have experience with fully worker-owned companies and with like gaining investment in that situation?
This was actually a discussion at lunch, because we have looked at that. I mean, philosophically, I like the idea of a co-op. And, whether it's a co-op or Mondragon or, however you want to look at it. The one co-op that we did look at, to seriously invest in, wanted the investors to have absolutely zero rights. And we did not, and this was kind of tricky because, philosophically, we're totally on board with all of this. But we felt that the executive team was not skilled enough for us not to be offering advice. Meaning, they did not have the skill set, they were young, and investors would have no seat on the board and have no rights. So you have opened, I think this is probably more of a breakout discussion kind of thing, because I think workers deserve a chunk of the company and have a say in the company, but we also have to recognize that we are not all equal because we all know different things. And so we need to figure out how we value the knowledge that everyone is bringing to the table, and how do we learn to collaborate instead of just be right?
Hi, thanks. You have percentages here, and you also have gross amounts of money. So, if another 100,000 comes into the formula, another investor, how does that affect the percentages? Do they automatically adjust, or?
Yes. Yeah, they automatically adjust. So
There's a dilution that
it's called dilution.
Right. Just straight percentage. Okay, and then my other question was, is there room in this formula for conventional loan to boost the company?
Yeah, I mean, if you have the assets to do debt, it's less expensive than doing equity. So if you're able to do that, most startups don't have that. Vermont, it was easy because we had ovens and trucks and all in a building. So you can actually borrow money against those kind of assets. It's harder when you're a startup.
this is kind of a short question, but a long question. I'm from New York. In New York, our agricultural schools are suffering greatly. The one great land-grant college is begging for money. Having served as the executive director of a trade association who had a real interest in what their alma mater, many of the trade association members' alma mater was, I'm wondering how much input are you giving to the colleges that would educate the people who would supply maybe another farm that could produce some of the stuff that you're talking about in terms of your needs to produce? And how much are the colleges involved with all of this? I mean, I know that Orly, that this program educates, farmers, but there's a reciprocal thing that could be happening in terms of the universities and colleges here in Vermont, and I would love it if you would come to New York so we could start this conversation there.
Well, actually, I think all of us could probably put something in. Vermont's very small, so that basically internships float around, and there's people end up serving on boards or talking to. We're always intersecting with somebody else, so none of this is happening in a vacuum. Whereas New York it's a little bit different animal. So that even with Dartmouth and there are various colleges and university. I mean, we have the University of Vermont, we have Strolling College, which is a premier agricultural school. All of these schools are producing farmers and whatnot, and the farmers literally are able to knock on the door. Black River is familiar with farmers, and farmer goes to Black River goes to MamaSezz or Vermont Smug. So because the state is so small, remember, we're under 1 million people. The issues that you're talking about don't really happen because people just end up tripping over each other, even if we don't intend to. I mean, Orly might have a comment.
So the lieutenant governor is coming to the Strolling of the Heifers, and you know why he can come to the Strolling of the Heifers? And by the way, he's not going to be in the parade. He's going to be an announcer of the parade, is because he found relief work for somebody to take over the farmers market on Saturday. I think that tells it all.
One other question in terms of taking venture capital money, or that, is it true that the expectation is you will end up having to sell your business? That they want an exit strategy, that it is difficult to hold on to your business if you use venture capital, or that's not true?
My experience is that they want an exit for sure. The group that Cathy's referring to is VMG. They have done some exits with the original owner, taking it back. But yeah, they're definitely looking for an exit.
I found out generally, to my disappointment, that they generally want not the owner. They want to maximize their investment.
Yes. Yeah. So it's interesting with the raise that we just did with this gentleman I was just telling you about. He's the opposite. He wants to change the world, and so he's like, we are not exiting this thing. You're in this for the long run, right? Individuals, yeah. So it's a different world. But all the private equity and venture capital I've ever seen, they need an exit. I mean, they're to their defense, they're putting the money, your retirement dollars at work, right? So CalPERS, the California Retirement Pension, so they have to return the money to their customers. So that's really what they're doing.
Do we have time? So yeah, and I think this is along the lines of what he's saying, but it's sort of like the question of the long-term destiny of a food business. So we're talking about the startup phase, and I hear what you're saying about how expertise is important, and that can be missing from worker ownership, where like an investor who has a lot of money might have more knowledge about money than the workers do. So that's an important balancing factor. And then I have like this idealistic notion that, well, eventually those workers are going to have the most knowledge about that company than anyone. And so then in 10 years or 20 years or at some point, is it ideal that it be all worker-owned? And if there's VC, how do we avoid a sellout so that you eventually dilute the quality of the food? Like, what's the ultimate future destiny for a growing food business that is going to be the most sustainable, like, final state, so that we don't end up all selling into conglomerates eventually?
I think the problem is in the situation that I was referring to, there was a question on whether you were going to get down the road with the current management at the beginning. And so in another situation that I was involved in, the startup guy literally failed, meaning without a team of dedicated investors, mission-oriented, company in business, not us taking our money out, this company would have gone down the tubes. And because we said, you know what, this guy is the wrong guy for the job, we need industry expertise on the board, and we're going to have to put in some more money, which we all did. Right. Without the investors being, and this wasn't a co-op, without the investors being able to step in and say, okay, this is the only way the company's going to succeed. Right. And it appears to be succeeding right now, it wouldn't be in place.
Right, so that's the beginning. But then, like, what's the end?
Yeah, I think there's some really good case study examples out there. If you look at King Arthur Flour, when the Sands family was ready to exit, they were ready to retire. They'd worked for years to change King Arthur Flour into an ESOP, employee-owned. And there's a lot of great resources in Vermont around that kind of thing. If you just Google it, there's the Workers Center. There's an employee ownership. Chelsea Green's a good example, yeah. And, even like Chroma Technology, this is employee-owned. They came out of Omega, so they were very talented, yeah.
Is there another way that is a good sustainable future for a company besides worker-owned? I mean, I have a worker-owned co-op, so that's what I'm saying. Is that the goal? Or is there another sustainable goal for where a food company can go after their startup phase? Ideally, in your minds, I'm just asking your opinion.
No, I mean, I think it's been hugely successful at King Arthur Flour. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's a great option,
right.
for sure.
Are there other options though in your minds about where a company can go sustainable?
Well, I mean, it could just be an entrepreneurial company.
Or a family-owned company, or yeah.
It doesn't really matter, because a successful company could buy out the investors.
Right.
Which gives you more scale. I mean, one of the, depends on what your vision is, right? So we were talking at lunch about, these big companies come in and they buy up all these natural and organic companies. Like, how do you keep your values? And my answer to that is, like at Vermont Bread Company, is to weave those into the actual DNA of the company. So there is no way that you can make Wonder Bread and put it under Vermont Bread name. It has to be organic. It has to be natural and organic bread. So that's just who it is, and it's kind of woven into it. And so, like, trying to find ways to do that and having a bigger company own that to, get more people away from Wonder Bread, it's kind of a cool thing. Employee stock ownership by its very nature, and family ownership for the most part, is incremental, right? So it depends on what your vision is.
Thank you.
And by the way, the Vermont Employee Ownership Center is back here. Raise your hand. Okay.
So, since this is our chance to ask Orly questions, and we haven't, naming of your company is not an insignificant part of marketing, in my experience. So I wondered if you would tell us the story of naming the Strolling of the Heifers. I've heard several different versions.
It's not glamorous. It was sort of a light bulb moment. I was a learning specialist in a school district, and I live in Dummerston, Vermont, and a couple of my neighbors are merchants, and they came over for dinner. This was 19 years ago. I was very happy with what I was doing. Before I tell you the story, I will tell you that I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I guess it's in my blood. Even when I was at the school district, I would get bored and I would write grants and create new programs. Some people didn't like that I was doing it, but I had fun. The kids had fun. That was the most important thing. So my friends came and had dinner with us, and they were talking about rejuvenating Brattleboro here. Brattleboro was really not looking good. It wasn't looking like it is today. Many stores were boarded up. They all blamed it on Walmart coming across the river, and had nothing to do with that. And they were talking about rejuvenating by apple days, daffodil days. They even had Hawaiian days, and they did it. And I said, Hawaiian days? What do you got to do with Hawaiian, you know, right here in Brattleboro? Makes me shiver. So I said, what do we have that nobody else has? Well, we have the Holstein Association right down the street. At that point, what did I know about a Holstein? I thought this Holstein Association kept genealogical records of the Heifers, the Holsteins all over the world. Well, it's just, I learned that it's just the United States. So I said, you want to put Brattleboro on the map? Walk a few cows up Main Street. But I said, you know what? That's not whimsical enough. And I said, let's make it whimsical. You know, the teacher and me came, and we went around the room, and we came up with Strolling of the Heifers, which is different than Running of the Bulls. It's a family-oriented, very strong, fun family event. And the undercurrent of all that, that was the leader, is to help people understand that they have to support their local farms. So, you know, before I thought about this, you do have to understand, the story goes that I've been thinking about it for probably 8 months. My neighbor, who owned the Miller Farm in Dummerston, would meet with me. And, you know, he would start saying to me, you like what you see here? Because I would walk the roads there, and it's beautiful vistas, and we shared some land. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, then you better go tell all your friends to start buying from farmers, because you see this, you like this, you won't see this in 10 years. Unless you and your friends do that. And you're a teacher, you do these things, you do teacher training, so go out and tell your friends. So I said, yeah, I can do a conference. I know how to do that. I used to train teachers as well. And so I quickly realized I would be preaching to the converted. How do we get everyone involved? And that's when the Strolling of the Heifer, when my friends came, and that idea came, and it was a light bulb moment. And, you know, we started with nothing, like Lisa said, literally, back of a napkin. And I called these various, my husband thought I was crazy. I called all these people, and I was still working. And they said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And they pledged, you know, all this funds. And then at the end, I said, oh my God, I raised all this money. What am I going to do with this money? I'm working. I can't take any money. So we decided to create a farm-to-school program, and we started giving money all over Vermont. And I was the only one who was monitoring it, and quickly realized that I couldn't do it. So we had to bring it back to Windham County. We did it for 6 years, and then, you know, the district here started getting a coordinator and started doing that kind of work, and other places in Vermont did too. So it gave them a little taste, which was wonderful. And then, okay, so then I asked the farmers, what else can I do with this money? So they said, well, we don't have a middle management. It's very hard to get for farms. So I started this program, and actually Bernie helped me, and I did it for 3 years. And then the school district, the Career Center took over that. And then I said, well, what should I do now? And they said, well, young farmers can't borrow money and established farmers can't borrow money. 40% of young farmers or 25% of established farmers couldn't borrow money. So we started the first ever agricultural microloan fund. And I actually, we raised, with 2 performances from Pete Seeger, $100,000. And he actually donated his time for that. I mean, it goes on, and then we make them sustainable, and we let go of it. And that program is actually in, you know, the whole of New England banks are using that system. And Arn Hammelman at People's Bank helped me a great deal with that. That surrender money is still revolving around there, which is wonderful. And then, okay, so now we've done that, and what else can we do? So actually Nancy Kane from Against the Grain called me up and said, you know, there's this BDCC here, did this competition, and I came in 3rd place. I should have been the first place. And you know why? Because my business plan cannot compete with people in technology and all that kind of stuff. So she said, you need to start a agricultural business plan competition. So I said, okay. So I called BDCC and I said, listen, I can do the marketing for you. I can make it sexy. And you guys know how to do this. So we ran one traditional and one, and we didn't own this building yet. So we gave out $60,000 in prize money. It was just for a business plan. So we did that for like 8 years. And people over and over told us, you know, the support that we got from January to June was huge. Yeah, the prize money was fun and it's sexy, but it's not a lot of money. We had 18 winners, 18 finalists, and each person got at least $1,000. It was the only way you can ever write a business plan and get paid $1,000, and they all stayed. And it was great. So, but they all said, you know, it was the support that we need. And then I got brave enough and I started Windham Grows, which really provides a support and scales up small businesses. And I've been very, very fortunate to, because I know nothing, to surround myself with people who do know something. So Jim Vrzino, Karen Cross, Cathy Berry, Charlie Marinoff. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who, an incredible advisory committee, and incredible people who run this program. And so we're scaling up, and we are, I mean, it's, how many rounds of it did we do? Come over here and tell me.
We've done 4 cohorts. We're going to start our 5th in July, and it's about 36 companies, I think. So quite a few.
And restaurant apprenticeship program too.
Oh, yes, thank you. And the other thing that we do right in that kitchen, and that's very close to my heart. Remember, I'm an educator. It's probably the hardest work we do, but it's our farm-to-table apprenticeship program where we provide nutrition and culinary training for underemployed and unemployed folks in our community. And it has changed lives, and it's just wonderful. And this year, I'm really happy about this. We have a partnership with the Brattleboro Retreat, and they're providing therapeutic job coach who's going to provide therapeutic sessions throughout the day with the participants. And the participants that we have many barriers and many challenges, a lot of addiction problems. And so this will be a very, very exciting banner year for us. I'm really hoping that it helps a lot of people.
So I'm hoping I didn't miss it, but could you go over how you fund the work that you do? Some of the things I was thinking about for Los Angeles, where I'm from, is being able to fund women and their businesses. And when I'm listening to you talk about like women with business plans, I have a lot of friends who have ideas for businesses, but they're like, so how do they transition from working in the jobs that they are doing to the work that they'd like to be doing? And And so some of what was going through my head was like, if I could start something that would be able to be sort of similar to this work here and then like another conference that I went to, then there would be a lot of women who could be funded. But how do I get started doing that work?
Well, I have to tell you that the work that I do, it's work of love. And really the first 8 years that I was doing Strolling the Heifers, I never got paid. I just turned it over to the organization. And the board felt that we really need to, it's growing up and people should be replaceable, so you should actually get paid. And it was a board decision. But I'm very frugal, and I do it from one little piece to the next. It's like sewing a huge quilt with very little small pieces. If you saw the number of people who have either of, and that parade and festival, that's the best enterprise we have. That's what supports this building, and let me tell you, it costs a lot of money to run this building, just heat. I keep going and turning electricity off. Today is a special day because the guests are here. It's the parade and festival, that's our enterprise. And that's the major fundraiser for the Strolling of the Heifers. If all the other programs went away, we're still here. And I think that's a big, huge problem for nonprofits. They don't have an enterprise of some sort. And that's what pays some salaries. We're a very small crew, but we have a lot of volunteers. And also, many of the folks that you see here are from Voc Rehab. They are from Vermont Associates. They are from Vermont, all the various different programs that do job trainings.
So maybe it's like, I think, Lisa, I think you might have said something about like a nonprofit or for-profit. So maybe having a for-profit arm of a nonprofit, I don't know, I might be putting things together. I'm still working on my business acumen, but having a for-profit arm of something that could support the nonprofit work.
Yeah, I call that mission pull. Mission pull. It takes you away from your core mission. I think you're better off being really focused. There's a ton of money out there in community foundations. I don't know if I was on the board of Vermont Community Foundation for 8 or 9 years. And there's this huge transfer of wealth that's happening with the kids with the baby boomers and then their kids. There's this huge, like, trillions of dollars coming into community foundations. And this kind of work is something that a lot of supporting orgs or community foundations in general like to support. So I don't know about it in your area. But I know the Vermont Community Foundation's been a great resource for the state, both in terms of their own funding and their network